This then is the 51st chapter of the Qur'an, and by convention it is called the Scatterers. It forms an implied part of the Qaf section of the muqaṭṭaʿāt portion of the Qur'an. To understand the muqaṭṭaʿāt, or mystery letters, see my muqaṭṭaʿāt video on my YouTube channel or on Qur'anite.com, or in the appendix section of the ebook or hard copy. The Qaf symbol has two values here, one conceptual and the other specific. The conceptual value is that God keeps his promises, and the specific value is the verses at 27:4-5. Quote, "Those who believe not in the hereafter, we have made their works fair to them, so they wander blindly. These are they for whom is the evil of punishment, and in the hereafter are they those most in loss." This chapter then treats of the themes of provision, warning and responses thereto, and judgment. These themes are introduced in the opening section. In the name of God, the Almighty, the Merciful, by the scatterers are scattering, and the bearers of burden, and those sailing with ease, and those who distribute by command. You are but promised what is true, and the judgment will befall. By the sky possessing paths, you are in speech differing. Now, clearly there is room for interpretive speculation. However, I see this opening section as referring firstly to the scatterers of seed, i.e. those who produce harvest. Verse 2, to the beasts of burden, which then carry the produce. Verse 3, to the ships which carry the produce far and wide. And verse 4, a reference to the process of selling and distributing that produce. What follows is a confirmation about the Day of Judgment. The Qur'an appeals to what is known, it appeals to what is experienced. And we all consume produce. If we didn't, we would be dead. And on the basis of what has preceded, the Qur'an then appeals on the basis of that and makes a further assertion. Verse 5, you are but promised what is true, and the judgment will befall. The pivotal point of human experience is yet to occur, well, for those people who are alive in this world, and that is the Day of Judgment. One hears all kinds of especially paid rhetorical masters inveighing against the righteousness of God, saying how can God allow evil things to happen, how can God allow this to happen, etc. Well, they're judging something that isn't finished. Stephen Fry, somebody who comes to mind particularly, you wouldn't pronounce upon a play. It was only a quarter of the way through. The Day of Judgment is when these things are sorted. And of course there are apparent injustices in this world. We experience them every day. But we all go to God. We all go to what I call the zinger. I use this quite a lot in my talks. In the butcher's shop, you see this sort of fluorescent light that attracts the flies, and they go into it and go bzz. We're all going to this. And this is the only thing that we all know for an absolute fact is going to happen. And to pronounce upon the righteousness or otherwise of God without having seen what comes after death seems presumptuous and borderline silly to me. But there you are. People make their choices. God informs us that the judgment will befall. And I personally believe that. This is followed then with a reference to the sky at verse 7, which is a recurrent motif in the chapter and indicates God's provision, and is followed by a further oath. By the sky possessing paths, you are in speech differing. Now the Arabic for speech, qawl, can mean speech or teaching, doctrine or word, and referencing and anticipating, perhaps at least in part, the responses of those who heard the previous messengers mentioned as the chapter progresses. To continue, verse 9, deluded away from it is he who is deluded. Now, it here refers to remembrance of judgment. So if you've forgotten the day of judgment, or you think it is not real, then according to the Qur'an, you are deluded. Verse 10. Damned are the tellers of lies, those who are oblivious in confusion. They ask, when is the day of judgment? And then the answer follows, verse 13. The day they will be tried by the fire. Taste your means of denial. This is what you sought to hasten. Verses 13 and 14 answer them with salient characteristics of that day, fire and retribution. So they ask, when is the day of judgment? And then the Qur'an gives us this answer. It is the day that those who reject, will be tried by fire. And when I say reject, I don't mean reject the religion of Islam. Something by the traditionalists' own admission is scarce to be found within the pages of the Qur'an. I'm talking about those who fear God in the last day and do good works. And you don't need to actually belong to any religion to do those things. And many who do subscribe to religions and don't do those things, well, they have their reward, whatever that might be. The section which then follows stands in stark contradistinction to the sufferings of those who lied and mocked. Verse 15. Those in prudent fear will be among gardens and springs, taking that which their Lord gives them. Before that they were doers of good. They slept but little of the night, and at the break of day sought forgiveness. And in their wealth was a due for the one who asked and the one precluded. Now, I see verse 17, they slept but little of the night, foreshadowing or obliquely referencing al-sujud, as it translated, the submission, which is the night vigil to which others are invited and at which they make a determination regarding God and the Quranic revelation. We will get into this more when we reach, God willing, chapter 97, and you may look now, if you have the ebook, to understand what Layl al-Qadr actually means, because the witnesses to God are to invite people to al-sujud, and al-sujud is an evening vigil where particular portions of the Qur'an are read, and if you look at my work on the muqaṭṭaʿāt, you can understand what these portions are. As I work through these segments, I've started with chapter 50 for a reason, because this is the beginning of this section, which actually subdivides into further sections, and I will be saving these as playlists so that you can listen to these and also send them to other people for them to make their determination. Now, to go back to the point about the in whose wealth or in their wealth was a due for the one who asked and the one precluded. Abdullah Yusuf Ali, in his translation, makes some excellent points, which I have extracted from his broader comment here. Quote, true charity remembers not only those in need who ask, but also those who are prevented by some reason from asking. And the man of true charity seeks out the latter. There may be various reasons which prevent a man from asking for help. One, he may be ashamed to ask, or his sense of honour may prevent him from asking. Two, he may be so engrossed in some great ideal that he may not think of asking. Three, he may not know that he is in need, especially when we think of wealth and possessions in a spiritual sense, as including spiritual gifts and talents. Four, he may not know that you possess the things that can supply his needs. And five, he may be a dumb and helpless creature, whether a human being or a dumb animal, or any creature within your ken or power. Charity in the higher sense includes all help, from one better endowed to one less well endowed. Now to continue, verse 20. And in the earth are proofs for those who are certain, and in yourselves, do you then not see? Now we are exhorted to look around and within ourselves. Surely we are created. Surely God is real. Verse 22. And in the sky is your provision and what you are promised. Now, I believe that this refers ultimately to God, who, according to the Qur'an, sits upon the throne above the sky. I think it's also interesting that throughout the Qur'an, many appeals are made to as-samawat, the heavens, and the heavens map a story. And this story, it's become astronomy in later years, but originally astronomy and astrology were one art. And whether one agrees or not with particular interpretations, throughout human history, the sky has been held to indicate or in some way be related to events on earth. In the Hermetic tradition, as above, so below. And this is something which I believe personally finds purchase within the Qur'an. This chapter, like so many in this series, calls men to repentance, to turn to God alone. One of the major hurdles in a man's mind in this regard is what he perceives as a threat to his livelihood. Now, once you step out and nail your colours to the mast of God's ship, as it were, the world will seem to work against you. Old friends will walk away, business opportunities will dry up. This is how it is. However, what we've read here reminds us that God is above all things. Whatever is our provision is with God. People and circumstances are merely means by which we receive what God has decreed for us. A brief word about what God has decreed for us. Throughout the Quranic directive, we see that human efforts are required. So any kind of passivity, sitting back and waiting for God to do things when you don't do what you can do, is a false religion. And we see how that has worked out for the Islamic world. It's certainly not something that I hold to. I believe in working as far as you can, your efforts as far as you can, and trusting God for what you can't do. That seems to me to be a fair balance. Sitting around passively and expecting God to help you when you won't help yourself, I don't have any sympathy with it. I don't believe, from my understanding of the Qur'an, that God has any sympathy with it. So that's that one. Verse 23. Then by the Lord of the sky and the earth, it is as true as that you are speaking. Now this confirms what we've said above about the Day of Judgment. God is above all things, and He is Lord of all things. And it is as true as that you are speaking refers to the Day of Judgment. And the end of this verse echoes, you are in speech differing. When we read many of these surahs, we find that the beginnings set up the themes, and then as we progress through the surah, we find those themes almost repeat and fold and overlap as we go through. There now follows an aside featuring a key story from the history of Ibrahim. Ibrahim, we should remember, had forsaken home, tribe, family, his entire support network to serve God alone. Moreover, he had been denied a son and thus continuance of his line and name despite the promises of God, well, to that point. So many times in the Qur'an, people read, they often feel that the Qur'an is disjointed. It's not disjointed, it's terse. And a way of understanding it actually is quite close to how modern cinema works. You cut from scene to scene. Now, if you weren't trained, we are trained, we understand how cinema works. Fade to black, we understand that this is a period of time that's gone and come. These are conventions that we're just used to because we've grown up with them. But somebody seeing it for the first time would need to acquire a certain facility with these conventions. The Qur'an uses these conventions, but once we've divested the text of the values which the traditionalist imports from other places and can allow values to hold their Quranic voice, as it were, we then also need to learn to read the text in a more sensitive way. So there are many asides, parenthetical statements, parenthetical events which inform and enrich our understanding of the underlying narrative. It's not entirely linear. A film which comes to mind, I'm speaking extemporaneously here, a film which comes to mind would be, I don't recommend the film, but I'm just talking about the fabula, the way that the story is constructed, would be Pulp Fiction. The way that Pulp Fiction works as a film, it's not linear. It doesn't begin at the beginning and work its way through to the end. It's actually quite disjointed, but this disjointedness informs the overall picture of the story. Now that's quite an extreme example. I mean, there are more extreme examples in what you might call art films. But even in more mainstream types of films, you have flashbacks, you have parenthetical asides. In Shakespeare, for example, there are conventions, there are monologues, there are rhyming couplets. There are things which the audience would understand would have a particular kind of import. So the point that I'm making here is that what seems like suddenly now we're talking about Abraham. Yes, we are talking about Abraham. We've cut to the story of Abraham. Why? Because it gives us something which informs or enlarges upon or illustrates or compounds the underlying theme of this chapter. It's not disjointed. It's, if you think of it visually, if you think of it as a film and you allow the cuts to be what they are, it becomes much easier to understand. So to continue, Ibrahim represents the type of steadfast continuance in the promises of God, which is the essence of the qaf value within the muqaṭṭaʿāt system. So verse 24, has there come to thee the story of the honoured guests of Ibrahim, when they entered upon him and said, peace? He said, peace, strangers, and turned aside to his family and brought a fatted calf and placed it near them. He said, will you not eat? And he sensed fear from them. Now, traditionally, if a guest refused to eat, it meant that he harboured ill will toward the host or intended him harm. To continue, they said, fear thou not, and gave him glad tidings of a learned lad. And his wife came forward, crying out, and struck her face, and said, a barren old woman? They said, thus said thy Lord, he is the wise, knowing. So what she's really done is contested their assertion that she is able to have a child or will have a child. And their response is to say that God has decreed this. So that part is taken care of. So this addresses really the fact that Ibrahim's provision did come to him. He was faithful. And immediately we're in a second part or related story, which is that of the people of Lut, and who really represent those people who rejected. To continue, at verse 31, he said, he being Ibrahim, then what is your case, O emissaries? i.e., what do you want? 32, they said, we are sent to an evil-doing people, that we might send upon them stones of clay, marked in the sight of thy Lord for the committers of excess. And we brought forth such of the believers as were therein, and found not therein but one household of the submitted. And we left therein a proof for those who fear a painful punishment. Now, something which I touch on many times in my talks is that this is not a popularity contest. We live in an environment where people believe that the more people who agree with you, the more right you must be. This is not the Quranic position. And, Kim Kardashian's behind is going to get more hits, more interest in one day than anything I'm ever going to produce in my lifetime. The majority are not a good indicator of veracity. And in this case, Ibrahim came out from his people and he was justified. And Lut, one family of believers. And interestingly here at verse 36, and found not therein but one household of the submitted. And the word in the Arabic is muslimin, Muslims. So our traditionalist friend jumps on this and tries retrospectively, anachronistically, to apply to this term his own expectations of what this should mean, but fails to find them in the Qur'an because they're not there. And we left therein a proof for those who fear a painful punishment. Now, whichever of the contesting theses one holds to, the fact is that in the Dead Sea area of Palestine, today called Israel, there is an area which is claimed to be where Lot or the Sodom and Gomorrah may have been. There is a lot of information on the internet about this. Various people, Christians generally, have investigated this. Some of it's very interesting. I don't intend to pronounce upon that here. However, the Qur'an tells us that a proof exists for those who fear a painful punishment. Now, I do, and anyone who listens to my channel on a regular basis, I would imagine most people here do too. So the lessons that I take from this are that Ibrahim was justified. He remained true. He followed the directives for him at his time. He came out from his people. He refused to bow down to the idols of that time. And Lut also, his nephew, according to the Tanakh, he lived among the people of according to, again, the Tanakh of Sodom. The Qur'an does not use that word. And those people were destroyed. So this is a thumbnail sketch which is illustrative of the point, which is, to go back to my cinema idea, which is illustrative of the themes that have been set up in this chapter. And we continue at verse 38, and in Musa. So this refers back to proofs, and we left therein a proof for those who fear a painful punishment, and in Musa we left with him a proof, as it were. So verse 38, when we sent him to Fir'aun with a clear warrant. So here's another example of people who held to the promises of God and did God's bidding. 39, he turned away with his supporters, we're talking about Fir'aun here, and said, a sorcerer or one possessed. Now, this is a very common refutation against those who stand up and do what God says. They basically accuse you of being mad. 40, and we seized him and his forces and cast them into the sea, and he was blameworthy. So that's another vignette, another reminder of stories that we all know, and these stories are used to illustrate these points as summaries as we go through. 41, and in Ad, when we sent upon them the barren wind, it left nothing it reached, save it made it as though rotted away. And in Thamud, when it was told them, enjoy yourselves for a time, and they scorned the command of their Lord, and the thunderbolt took them while they were looking on, and they were unable to rise up, and they could not help themselves. 46, and the people of Nuh before, they were wantonly perfidious people. Now each messenger was called to leave home and hearth, and to warn his community. Prior to the successful outcome of their missions, each put his entire worldly hopes and possessions on the line. So this continues the motifs which are set up at the beginning of the chapter. It's one story. The text now turns to the physical creation in support of the underlying message. This is a parenthetical statement. 47. And the sky we built with might, and we are wealthy indeed, and the earth we spread out. How excellent are those who level. And every sort of thing we created in two kinds, that you might take heed. So flee to God. I am a clear warner to you from him. And make not with God another God. I am a clear warner to you from him. Now this is a parenthetical aside in the broader context of the histories of when warners came to their people. There's nothing here about a religion. There's nothing here about following any mullahs. So flee to God. I am a clear warner to you from him, and make not with God another God. Now, by another God, it's anything that you worship, whether it be a religion, a mullah, an ism, any kind of lie. I think it's quite comprehensive. And I get people who write to me, they want a religion. They think what I'm trying to do is replace one religion with another religion. Okay, well, that religion's false. What religion do you propose? I don't propose a religion. The Qur'an isn't giving us a religion. The word deen just means doctrine. It is a doctrine, but it isn't a religion, if by religion we mean dogma and rite. Now, if people develop methods of giving glory to God and praising God and giving charity and so forth, great, good for you, fantastic. You will have your reward. But to claim these things have some eternal or holy sanction, and that if someone doesn't do those things in precisely this way, this is an anti-Quranic stance. And I defy you to find justification, explicit justification, as explicit as for example, the discussion on when a woman may be touched after her monthly courses, the fact that men should refrain from their wives during that period. That's explicit. About inheritance law, about marriage and divorce procedures. Where it's important, God gives us the details. Where it's not important, it means that you are allowed to make your own decisions on these things. People say they want freedom, but they really don't. The Qur'an does not have a religion in this sense in it, and I accept that. Now, if another man wants to pray in a particular way, or he wants to give charity in a particular way, that's up to him. And he has his reward. And I have mine. And a Christian has his, and a Jew has his. This is another aside, but I get asked quite often about other religions. Well, firstly, the Qur'an is not a book about a religion. However, it allows that there are existing religions. And all it does is it calls those who are Jews not to, exaggerate and make exalted claims about themselves and etc. and asks them to believe the Qur'an. It doesn't mean they have to embrace any religion called Islam. I don't embrace a religion called Islam if by that you mean what a mullah will tell you it means. And I've seen no reason why a Jew should have to do that, or a Christian. What it does do is it calls us to follow these essential principles of guidance. And as regards to the Jews, that they should cease claiming some sort of racial superiority. And in the case of Christians, that they should cease setting up three gods, which they claim they don't, but they do. And it tells them to cease saying three, and it asks them to stop exaggerating. And these don't seem to me to be excessive requirements. However, the messengers didn't come with a religion. They didn't come with a religion called Islam. Said, okay, Fir'aun, now you've got to follow this. Here you are, 5 pillars, say the Shahada. No, this isn't how it worked. The Qur'an says that God guides, so turn to him alone. People aren't happy with that, but this is what it claims. If this is the imperative. So verse 52, there came no messenger to those before them, save they said, a sorcerer or one possessed. Have they handed it down between them as an inheritance? So that was 53. The it mentioned refers to the saying employed to refute the messengers. There's nothing new in what such people say. Their objections are so predictable they've become hackneyed. 54. So turn thou from them, thou art not censured. Thus the messenger is not reproved for turning from those whose response is to call him names. Modern equivalents would be conspiracy theorist, lunatic, nutjob, etc. Having warned these people and received such a response, the messenger is free of obligation. And this is as a witness, and I regard myself as a witness and as a teacher. In my role, having made these videos, especially these types of videos, and someone's listened to it to the end, I'm quit of thee. You make your own decision. I have no responsibility to you. I've delivered, to put it into Christian parlance, I've delivered my soul to you. What you do with that, that's up to you. So to continue. Also, to continue the point above about people who call messengers names, look at the calumnies heaped upon the messenger of God, in this case Muhammad, by those who claim to be his supporters, including accusations of actions which utterly contradict the Qur'an, such as marrying a child or taking more than the permitted number of wives. All of this comes from the hadith. This is, you couldn't really say any worse things about the Prophet Muhammad than those who claim to follow him say, quite frankly. With friends like these, who needs enemies? That would be one point. But the second point is if they say these things about him, are they not going to say as bad things at some point about anybody who really tries to implement what the Qur'an says? And I'm not saying that there aren't sincere people amongst those groups. There are sincere people among all groups. I'm talking about the core ideology as intoned by the mullahs. And I don't know, I have no window into another man's soul, but, well, God knows best. 55. But remind thou, for the reminder profits the believers. Now this is interesting. It's seen in a number of places in the Qur'an that the believers bear no one-to-one correlation with those who accept the Qur'an. Rather, this is a category of persons in whose hearts faith resides, and they can be found in all types of confessions, both with and without access to genuine revelation. Now, I'm not trying to be a sort of an all-inclusivist person here. This is not driven by some, let's all get together and have a big one world, hug around an oak tree. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that all beliefs are equal. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that what the Qur'an means by the term the believers, al-mu'minun, this is a condition of soul. It's nothing to do with group affiliation. The Qur'an asks us that when truth comes to us, when guidance comes to us, those who follow it will have no reason to regret or to fear. Now, this holds true. You should follow the best that you have. The Qur'an itself says, if there were better than this, I would follow it. It's not that we are ideologically locked into following a book, stupidly. No. My challenge is bring something better. I personally receive a constant stream of emails, unsolicited emails from people who say, I don't agree with this bit. Oh, I don't agree with that bit. Oh, I like this, but I don't like that. Bring something better. Bring something better, cohesively presented, not just, cherry picking a few verses and I think this. An entire interlocking system based on pan-textual comparisons of every example. Bring something better. And if you do, and it is better, I'll say thank you and follow it. But I tell you what, that's the last you hear from these people, because they're not really interested in it. What they want to do is just talk. So anyway, just talking, we know how useful that is. So to continue, it is these people, i.e. the believers in the Quranic sense, who can be reached effectively with the message of truth. And when they are reached by such a message, they will follow it and act upon it. Again, Muhammad is following in the tradition of the prophets of old, which is warn society, reap believers, incur rejection, provoke destruction. This is the model. Now, we see that late in the As-Sujud series, which I've touched on above, what that is, at chapter 110, Al-Nasr, that in Muhammad's case, people entered the doctrine. They repented. There was mass repentance and acceptance. And I will just quickly go through chapter 110. When the help of God and the victory come, and thou seest mankind enter the doctrine of God in crowds, give thou glory with the praise of thy Lord, and seek thou forgiveness of him. He is receptive. Now, for a long time I didn't understand this, but when I got that the whole model is of warning and destruction, this is a mitigation now. This is the model of Yunus. However, throughout most of the Qur'an, the expectation under which the messenger is operating is the model which has been outlined within the experience of the prophets mentioned above, which is, as I say, it is warn, reap believers, usually not very many, incur rejection, provoke destruction. And this is the model. So we should not forget that the messengers and the responses to them, whether it be the model of the final rejection followed by destruction, or that of repentance followed by leniency, are both foreshadowings of the greater event which awaits all mankind, namely the Day of Judgment. And it is this, the final day, when all men are judged by their true merits, which is the ultimate foundation for the thrust of this chapter. And it is to this foundational argument that the chapter returns. Verse 56. And I created the jinn and men only that they might serve me. I desire no provision from them, and I desire not that they feed me. God, He is the provider, the Lord of firm might. And for those who do wrong is a portion like the portion of their companions. So let them not seek to hasten me. And woe to those who are indifferent to warning from their day which they are promised. So the point and purpose of our lives then is to serve God. And naturally, one may do that in a wide variety of ways. I do what I do, but it doesn't mean that everyone should do what I'm doing. Believe me, there's plenty of room for initiative in this particular field. Again, the 56, 57, I desire no provision from them, and I desire not that they feed me. This is interesting. The way that people conduct themselves, they feel that they're doing God a favour. That I've suffered from this before. In fact, when I first started doing this task, and I was struck down immediately. I've touched on in various other talks. I got sick immediately for 4 months. I was out completely on my back with bronchitis, and it was horrific. And various other life things happened. I think that was to teach me that God doesn't need my efforts. If it weren't me doing this, someone else would be doing this. God can bring another people. It's you individually, I individually, not important. God does not desire provision from us. It works the other way, that we need His provision. And when you serve Him, you are a servant, and a privileged servant, and you are working for the best rewards. So religion, as it's commonly conceived of, consists largely in attempting to placate God with some portion from one's plate, whether it's a bit of your time, just go and quickly pray, that'll keep him happy for a while, or do this thing. Clearly in primitive cultures, this takes the form of giving something from one's food to an idol. But I mean this in the broader sense, that the same function exists in the mental realm. The man who thinks that he's giving some part of his time or his money to God, so he can squander what's left on what he chooses, or that in some way that God needs his contributions and is obligated as a result. This is a result of wrong thinking. God wants that we serve Him entirely. He does not need our provision. We read in the Qur'an that He can recreate the whole heavens and the earth like that. So He doesn't need me or you or any of us to do those things that we do. That it's our opportunity to do right. And to continue here at the verse at 58, he says, God, he is the provider, the Lord of firm might. Now this has an import for those warned, but also for those who are believers and strive to fulfill their commitment to warn others. Serving God is our purpose. God has no need of our services. We have no business fearing lack or harm. God, he is the provider, the Lord of firm might. And the chapter closes with a warning statement and exhortation to the wrongdoers. And for those who do wrong is a portion like the portion of their companions. Here, their companions references surely on the smaller scale those who went before and who rejected the messengers and were destroyed. And on the larger scale, it references those who are consigned to hell on the day of judgment. Verse 59. So let them not seek to hasten me. This means let them not seek to hasten the day of judgment. The way one seeks to hasten judgment is by rejecting God's warnings, as is borne out by the closing verse. Verse 60. And woe to those who are indifferent to warning from their day which they are promised. Now, in the case of Muhammad's time, the population was not destroyed en masse. Every individual within it has died, however, and awaits the day of judgment, including those of his time who were indifferent to warning. But that mechanism, that of warning and either retribution or reprieve, is found right across the Quranic narrative and remains operational. At the very least, we are told repeatedly that God's sunnah, the word sunnah incidentally occurs 16 times in the Qur'an, not in one instance does it refer to the messenger. We are told repeatedly that God's sunnah does not change. For example, 1777 says, the practice of those we have sent before thee of our messengers, ellipsis, has not changed, to continue, and thou wilt not find to our practice any alteration. And at 35:42-43, quote, and they swore by God their strongest oaths that if a warner came to them, they would be better guided than any of the communities. Then when a warner came to them, it increased them only in aversion, being proud in the land and scheming evil. And the evil scheme surrounds none save its authors. Await they save the practice of the former peoples. Thou wilt not find in the practice of God any change, nor will thou find to the practice of God any alteration. That's 35:42-47. Thus, this protocol remains effective. Quote again, nor wilt thou find to the practice of God any alteration. So no other means. It doesn't matter whether it's the Alex Jones method of taking out the bullhorn and shouting at the elite cars driving past and screaming and shouting, or whether you think some sort of physical revolution is going to do it. No, the Qur'an is very clear. Thou wilt not find to the practice of God any alteration. So this methodology, this method of warning, this is the only method. How many mullahs told you about this? I don't claim to like this, okay? I don't have any sort of pre-existing allegiance to this method. I'm just dealing with the facts on the page. And those facts indicate that this is the method. Now, we're entering a time of tyranny, you may have noticed. And it isn't going to be solved by Facebook likes. It isn't going to be solved by voting. It isn't going to be solved by ISIS. Or it isn't going to be solved by Alex Jones or the sort of, the preppers and the truthers. Not according to the Qur'an. According to the Qur'an, this is the method. So it's not going to be solved by your favorite mullah or sect or jumping up and down 5 times a day or any of this stuff. I may not like the way that it is, but I do have to deal with it. And I suggest that if you have a regard for the Qur'an and the message that it contains, that you read it in this light. We're entering a time of what they've got planned for us. I mean, do look up the Georgia Guidestones. Look up transhumanism. I know things may look nice and safe where you are right now, but the rulers, the actual elite, the actual rulers are moving the sheep from one sheep pen to another sheep pen. And this new sheep pen, it's not Club Med. It's going to be a vastly reduced number of people. And those people will fundamentally be, well, lobotomized. You may have noticed, if you look around and talk to people, that we're almost there now. However, the ability even to consider change will be so impossible. It will be like trying to imagine a colour that you've never seen. Now, the race is on. And I contend that the statement of God is true, and thou wilt not find to the practice of God any alteration. Now, I want to see the world better, and I don't hold to an apocalyptic vision exactly. I have no idea when the day of judgment is coming. I have no idea. It can come like that. I don't know. Along with the messenger who received the Qur'an, he's also had no idea, according to the Qur'an at least, whether we are promised good or evil. I don't know. But I do know that we are ruled, and that the model is to warn the elite. If the elite repent, as in the day of Yunus, then suddenly you'll find that all of this sexual immorality and filth on the televisions, all that will disappear. And within 5 or 10 years, the people with the green hair and the bits of metal through their noses and all of this stuff, behaving frankly disgustingly, I'm not saying they're the only people to do, but I'm sort of making a broader point, that will all change. They'll all be wearing, blazers and opening doors for women, and the manners will return, the morality will return, because they do what they're trained to do. They think that they're all amazing and original and in charge of their own specialness. But they're not. They're sheep. Most people are. And the elite know this. But the way the world is structured now, unlike the time of the Caesars or the pharaohs, for example, is that we're living through layers of duplicity. However, we read here, thou wilt not find to the practice of God any alteration. So the method that this chapter 51, speaks about has not gone away. It's not going to change. I advise you to consider what I've set out in this talk. You're very welcome to look at my work. Go to Qur'anite.com to download the book, etc. But if you're happier with another translation, then read that, because what I'm talking about isn't up for interpretation. It runs through the Qur'an like Brighton through a stick of Brighton rock. But the point and the task, so far as I can see, of the mullahs is to act as gatekeepers against this incredibly obvious thing. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. So I recommend reading the Qur'an from the beginning. Go through it. My translation, any translation. This is so obvious. This is so clear that even the traditionalist translations cannot frustrate or thwart this once you see it. But this is the model. And nothing has changed. And nor wilt thou find to the practice of God any alteration. 35:43.